Well, hello and welcome to this UK Column News special. We decided that we would play out the full audio of the very brave whistleblower that has spoken to us over the weekend about what's been happening in care homes as a result of the COVID-19 vaccinations. The clip is about 15 minutes long. We believe all of it needs to be heard by our wider audience, and so we'll play out that clip and then we'll take the trouble to discuss some of the things which this particular individual speaks about.
Hello?
Yes, hello. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
You've contacted me and given me some really interesting information about what you're seeing in the care system with regard to vaccinations for COVID-19. What are you able to tell us?
Well, my experience has been over this past year or so that the social care system has responded incredibly vigorously to all of the regulations and guidance that have come from the government. People have been fully on board with it, even to the point of being rather zealous about it. I haven't been part of that culture and felt that it's not been easy to express any questions about it. Probably this is the same in many other areas, but the reason why I'm saying that is because on the whole, for those who are in management positions in social care, there's a very strong pro-vaccine and pro-government narrative agenda. So what I've been coming across in the last few weeks in particular, I think it needs to be spoken about.
Okay, so vaccines have now come in some quantity into the care home system. What's been the result of the vaccination policy?
Well, from the reports that I'm seeing from my colleagues, the vaccines are very often accompanied by outbreaks. So I've seen quite a few colleagues reporting that they've been free from any illness over 12 months, and then the vaccines come in, and then an outbreak results. And these, as I say, are people who were very enthusiastically banging the drum for the vaccines a few weeks ago, congratulating each other on how many staff they'd got on board. And now there's a kind of very different story emerging.
Right, and are you able to say, to share with us where you're actually seeing that information?
For example, on groups for registered managers, so CQC registered managers, who it's mediated by the Care Quality Commission. Registered managers will share with one another in a kind of professional forum, and just recently begun seeing posts where they talk about how they're having to deal with outbreaks now, having previously been free from them, and many, when one person will comment, many others will say, well, it's the same here, I've experienced the same thing. For some of them, it's, three-quarters of the workforce suddenly becoming positive, which is extraordinary, and residents being affected as well.
So the background is that care homes have run a very careful, protective policy for their residents, and that's worked very well. So there's been a low, correct me if I've got this wrong, but there has been a low incidence of COVID, and then the vaccine's coming in, and then something's changing. Is that what you're describing?
Yes, that is the picture. Of course, it's different provisions. These are maybe care homes, they may be day settings, they may be settings for vulnerable people, and some of obviously the care homes where elderly residents will have most likely been affected in some way throughout. But now that the vaccine rollout is moving across the whole generality of provision for people in need of social care, we're seeing settings which previously had been managing fine are reporting these very dramatic increases in cases, either cases or actual outbreaks.
Do we actually know which of the vaccines has been administered? Is there a difference resulting from which particular vaccine's been used?
Well, that's not been reported to me. I expect one could follow that up. But the one which I've heard most doubts about is the Moderna Pfizer vaccine.
Okay. And so a key question, if you have people responsible for the care of elderly people and they are seeing this sort of increase, how should care staff report their concerns? What channels would care staff use to report concerns that they're seeing something strange happen after vaccines have been administered?
Well, I think they probably should be going to the regulator, the CQC, Care Quality Commission. Perhaps they could be going to, if they're a member of a professional association, they could be going to that. But I think it's, or possibly there's an NHS. It's quite difficult because there seems to be a lot of tin ears for any other story than that it's all wonderful.
Do you feel under pressure in what you can and can't say in respect to what you're seeing and your colleagues are seeing?
Very, very much so, in terms of there is an atmosphere of everyone has to be behind the narrative, and anyone who puts their head above the parapet and even just asks a question immediately stands out, because it's so such a strong pressure to be on board with the war against the virus.
Are you able to just say something about your particular qualifications?
Yeah, so I've worked in the sector for 30 years or so, and I have the level 5 qualification in adult and young person social care. I'm a registered manager of a provision, and registered with the Care Quality Commission. So in a nutshell.
You've got a lot of experience in the sector. You must have seen a lot happening over 30 years. Have you ever seen anything happen like this before in those 30 years' experience?
No, and my main concern here, and this is happening incrementally, is that increasingly anyone working in social care and the NHS, I think with the NHS it's much further gone, is becoming less and less able to act independently, and more being treated as an agent of the state, and medicalising procedures. So whereas previously someone in social care would be responsible for providing the care, if there was a problem, they would be helping to see the doctor. Now it's much more going into the direction of those providing the care are also being instructed how to have medical interventions. So that might just be doing the testing, or it might just be recording symptoms of that. But what I'm really wanting to get to is that those working in social care are less and less able to exercise their own professional judgment and their own caring quality why they came into the profession, and more just having to follow guidelines and procedures that are passed down from on high. And I think that has a demoralising effect on people's own standing in what they're doing and have love and expertise for.
And what would happen if you challenge those guidelines?
Well, I think it's very difficult, because the risk is when you make a challenge, you risk losing your registration, and you risk inspection, downgrading. That has a knock-on effect, obviously, for all of the staff, but also for the residents as well, because one can only operate under license, as it were. So it's almost a black and white situation. You dance to that tune, or you appear to dance to that tune, or you go off and do your own thing completely independently without any of that funding, or which is very hard to do also in regulatory terms. So I think it creates a bit of a monoculture, whereas perhaps what we need is more of a diversity of different settings, with people taking their own approaches based on their own experience and professional judgment. That's my feeling.
Thank you very much for that. That was a very, very good and concise report. So you're also seeing a little bit of confusion with the testing procedure itself.
Yes, not just a little bit. I think huge confusion in terms of an understanding of what the procedures are supposed to be, in terms of how often testing and isolating, whether at home or at work and so on. But then people just finding that whatever those procedures are supposed to be, the system doesn't actually work, because the tests come back very, positive and negative consecutively, with depending on how often one does them. It's impossible to interpret them in a common sense way. And there are huge, whether delays in the mail or on phone lines or processing centres. It doesn't seem as though this system is really serving any purpose. It seems as if it's just going through the motions. Of course, the managers are keen to be following the correct procedure, but they don't want to be picked up on that. It's hard to read into their comments that they think that there's any logic in the way it's working, or that it's actually helpful.
Right, and where would those managers take the key advice from as to how to conduct these tests and what they should do as a result of what the results of the tests are?
Well, from their own training with Public Health England or the NHS webinars, professional associations, there would be guidance about those. So they have, that's the background that they'll have.
Right, there's not a sort of common statement document, policy document from CQC or the NHS on, you work in a care home, this is how you should conduct and interpret the tests.
Well, it's an ever-changing landscape. It's very hard. I mean, I'm just reading now one of someone who's been doing the LFT, the lateral flow test, daily and having no symptoms, negative for 8 days, and then lo and behold, having positive tests coming from the other tests, the PCR test coming back in the post a few days later. So it's very hard to know how to interpret, or what. It also has a huge knock-on consequence that the effects of the positive tests can be quite radical when staff members need to go and isolate for many provisions which are anyway short-staffed.
Difficult circumstance. And my last question is, are you able to tell us anything about access for relatives? This is a particularly emotive subject for me, because I have an very elderly relative who suffered a very bad stroke, who's in a care facility. I'm not able to get in to see her. And I have another elderly lady who I probably could get in to see, but I'm going to say it's not being made easy. What are the general rules that you're encountering on visits by relatives?
Well, in general terms, I feel that among registered managers there is a desire to make access possible, but a great deal of uncertainty and confusion and, frankly, fear about, how and whether to do that, given the environment that's been created. So it's a tricky one. I think people recognise that there's a right for residents to be able to see their relatives, but not quite knowing how to do that in many cases within the guidance. And I expect that on the ground, I expect that there's a huge diversity of different practice.
Yes, and this must inevitably, I'm speaking from the point of view of being a relative, but from the point of view of staff, this must put them under huge pressure, because they will know, I'm sure they experience the feelings and frustration of family members.
Absolutely, and I think you've covered yourselves some, instances, standoffs between staff and family members. In some cases, the staff are sympathetic. In other cases, they are just wanting to enforce those rules. But I think increasingly widely, staff are feeling that this isn't sustainable to carry on in this way. Yeah.
Okay, let's. I'm going to say thank you very much for that, and thank you very much for being prepared to talk to the UK column.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it. That was a very concise interview with that particular individual. I've got 11 different points on my sheet of paper. I took some notes while that was playing. And the key issues that I picked out from it is, one, talking about the fact that the care system as a whole had acted vigorously, almost in a zealous way, in adopting the government's procedures. We then had colleagues being vaccinated. They were having enough trouble coping with the load. They get vaccinated and they become unwell. We've got people previously free of COVID are now having problems after the vaccination campaign. So these are all key issues to do with the vaccination program itself. And they use the term a dramatic increase in the number of outbreaks. So if I just pause there, David, what was your take on the revelations overall?
Well, there was so much in there. I mean, like you, I've got a long list. The initial description is of this zealous compliance. So there's a willing compliance. There's little resistance to the government narrative, but that's reinforcing because there can be no resistance, because resistance is suicide in terms of a career.
Yeah,
it's going to cost you your job. The atmosphere, everyone must be behind the narrative. So you can't even question it. Never mind resisting. You can't question. You can't ask questions. And that's in the care sector. And she says, the NHS is worse. The NHS is much further gone. So you've now got a situation where there's no independent action possible. Everyone's just an agent of the state. They can't question. They must comply. And then that has a demoralizing effect. Right? She talked about monoculture. So all independent thought is driven out. The disciplinary system is used to drive out independent thought. Drive out thought because you're not allowed to question, so it's just compliance. You simply follow the diktats of others. It becomes a machine. You lose the human aspect. You lose any self-checking process. So what goes in at the top happens. You're not interacting with a skilled, dedicated, knowledgeable workforce that will ask questions and will challenge management on anything that's going to be harmful. That doesn't seem to be allowed. So it's very much going to act like a machine. And then the machine finds that when the vaccine's rolled out, things get worse. There are outbreaks. And it doesn't know what to do because everything comes down to rules enforcement. And she's then talking about, well, the system seems to be going through the motion. So you've got a system insisting on expedience, but the system doesn't know what it's doing. The system is not something anyone can have confidence in.
No,
This is a very troubling picture.
Yeah, David, you're spot on, I think, there, because she's talking about a changing landscape and confusion, huge confusion is what she says about the testing of people. When I asked the question, well, who would you consult with in a professional sense to discuss this sort of thing? She mentions the Care Quality Commission and then suggests, but it could be the professional regulatory body that you are signed into. But then the statement is made, but the problem is they seem to have tin ears. They don't want to know any concerns about the policies that they have put in place. And as you say, if you challenge this in any way, you're going to severely damage your career or you're going to lose your job. So at one point, I had it here as point number 8, they were saying that basically you weren't there as a carer anymore to think about the job and to make your own individual judgment about how best to care with somebody in your facility. You had become, and the quote is, an agent of the state, unquote. This is a massive change in the provision of health and healthcare.
I mean, I think we began to see this in April and May when we started seeing the excess mortality in the care homes. And what was the cause of it? The cause of it was blanket do not resuscitate orders.
Yeah.
And mixed with people being exported from hospitals with indeterminate COVID status and being pushed into care homes which weren't equipped and hadn't actually developed any procedures at that stage for how to deal with it internally.
Yeah.
And also the withdrawal of emergency healthcare from, so if a case was found in a care home, then they weren't necessarily going to get medical support from the local NHS. So those three things together made for a pretty dire situation in the first wave, if you want to call it that. And there was excess mortality as a result. Now the question is, were we seeing the same situation then with care home management that didn't feel that they were able to question the policies that were being posed on them from outside? But now we're a year later and they've implemented, as we've already heard, they've implemented all the requirements of the Care Quality Commission and other regulators. And they have, in this winter, absolutely achieved any goal that they could possibly have wanted to achieve in respect of repeating what happened in April and May, because the statistics are absolutely clear. There has been no excess mortality in the care homes during November, December, January, until the vaccination happened. And then we start seeing excess mortality in the care homes. Yeah. The ONS every week publishes the data. Where is the excess mortality happening? And the care homes have not been, it's been on the average.
Yeah.
So this clearly isn't a new situation that managers are unable to speak out, but obviously things have developed to the point where it has become an issue for them that they can't speak out.
Yeah. I would just say to the audience who's listened to that clip with us, we were also provided with evidence showing dialogue on official but social chat sites where care home managers from across the country were all reporting exactly the same things. They were talking about protecting people, no incidents of COVID, vaccines coming in, and then suddenly we've got an incident. So the person that you've just heard speaking was able to provide evidence of other colleagues dispersed in other care homes who were also reporting exactly the same things. And one of those people even said, "This is bizarre. There is something going on." So David, just to keep it as short as we can, it seems to me that this has got to be a deliberate policy by the people in power. We can't have a situation where we have the professional care workers on the ground realizing that something's wrong, and this is not happening in one or two instances, this is repeating across many facilities, and yet they're not allowed to report it because there's tin ears, or they can't report it because they fear reprisals for their jobs. This indicates that the overall policy of what's happening with very vulnerable elderly people is a deliberate central government policy, and it surely must have malice behind it, because of course these vulnerable elderly people are becoming ill.
The things behind it are legion. Why did the communist regime of the East never work? Because you had a lot of able people. Right? I mean, Russia wasn't the home of chess masters and poets and the writers of great novels, because they were stupid people. And yet the oppression came, the surrender came, the people succumbed to the threats, and the whole society went down and down. And are we seeing that too? Yes, it's policy, but it's also culture, and it's also emptiness spiritually. The reasons behind this, I think, are legion. I find it difficult to put. I found that a really moving piece, and it raised so many issues. I find it difficult to put quickly into a few words. I'll resort to poetry if I may. This is a poem I've seen quoted recently, actually, about the situation that we face, and I think it is quite relevant. It's called The Second Coming by William Butler Yeats, and the first stanza is: turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the centre cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. That, I think, is what that lady was describing.
Yeah, David, thank you very much for that. We'll end by saying, I'm going to call it bravery. It is brave to speak out when you know that you're taking such huge risks. So we'd like to thank that particular person for having the courage to speak out and also coming to the UK column. That's a huge compliment for us. What can viewers and listeners do who've just heard that exposure from inside the care system? Well, of course, share it with people, talk about it, and if you are in contact with people in the care system, give them support, but also pass the information back to them, because the information that was given to us had come from manager level, so somebody with considerable experience, and people working at a lower level within the care system may not be aware of all these other factors happening around them. So do share the information, give them support and encouragement, but we're going to say thank you very much to a brave whistleblower. We'll end it there, I think. Thanks for joining us, David.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.